The approach that we're talking about this time is called the blob. And I'm just gonna follow the video at the beginning here, and then once I get going, I'll back up and discuss the history and some of the things that I've sort of observed about the technique. So the way we start the painting is we're taking a gray and we're scraping it onto the painting. I used a canvas this time because I think that this technique works better. The holes, the canvas weave holds the paint better when it comes to this particular technique. So I knifed the paint on, I wiped it around, and now I'm scraping it off. So the paint only sits in the little holes underneath the rest of the texture. And the idea behind the blob is that you're making a blob of paint and you're painting into it. Now, in the case of the blob, the way we're going to be talking about it, the blob is a gray. Now, the first question you have to answer is, what is the value of the gray? Like, which gray are we going to use? And the answer is you want the gray to be the value of the objects or the subject that you think is the most important. So what I did was I have this pile of firewood that I'm working on, and I picked the value that was kind of in the middle, that seemed to be the right value for the most of the wood colors that I was the most interested in. And I think the best place where the blob and the value of it worked out was in the bottom part of the painting, where there's the one piece that's sitting alone on the table. But the benefit that the blob gives you is speed and handling. And it sounds like I'm talking about a car, but speed and handling are really important when it comes to painting. So the value of the color, that the gray that we put down, if it's tied to the most important areas of the painting, it gives you an advantage in terms of being able to mix the colors that you need to be able to mix. You can use the color that's already on the painting to match all your values, so you can be super controlled about your values, and which we know when it comes to mixing, value is everything. And the fact that you're painting into this wet matrix of paint is where the handling quality comes in. You get just a glide off of your brush strokes. And you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just drawing with local colors. And you can see, like, one brush stroke goes a really long way. And that's something that will not happen on a dry canvas. Now, if you go back to the beginning of the video here, you can see that I've got a palette knife loaded with a lot of oil paint. And when I go to scrape it on there, what happens? That giant load of paint goes nowhere. But as soon as I lubricate the surface, I have a small brush load of paint that just goes and goes and goes for miles. And if you've ever been to the Metropolitan Museum in New York, there's a painting by Rubens there that has a brush stroke in it that's like 3.5 feet long. And the only way you're going to pull off a brush stroke like that is if you're painting into wet paint. So this technique tends to be a technique that a few people really like and most people hate. If you're one of the people that just really doesn't get anything out of this technique and you just kind of feel like it's a waste of time, what I would like you to refer back to or get out of is the lubricated surface. If you get nothing else out of it, the lubricated surface is a real advantage. I use this technique mostly, I use variations on it every day, but I use the technique the way that you're seeing it now, mostly for its speed. If I'm doing a classroom demo and I'm painting along with the students, let's say we're doing a portrait in class and we have a model and everything, as the teacher, I need to make time to walk around and talk to everybody. And I need to finish the painting. So if we have a few different sittings, I almost always use the blob first. And then I can get so much work done so fast using the blob in that first couple sittings that I'm days ahead of the class. So that gives me time to walk around. And then in that case, I'm just letting it dry, and then I come back and fine tune. In the painting I'm making in the video here, I'm doing this all at once, so everything is sopping wet. And I suppose another good thing to get out of this technique is it teaches you that you can continue to paint while the paint's wet. You don't need to stop to let it dry, although a lot of times we do want to do that, and I do that all the time. My preference for oil painting technique is to layer and not necessarily to paint all at once. So this is a little out of my wheelhouse. I don't practice painting like this all the time, but it is very efficient, and it's helped me a lot throughout the years. Now, I can't necessarily point you to an old master or some historical painter that I know for a fact used this technique. This is a technique that I learned from a few different artists, but people that are a lot more recent. I think that this technique and the things that you would learn from it are things that people have been doing since the beginning. It's just not necessarily presented this way. We could look at the pre-Raphaelite painters. They did the same thing as this, except they used white instead of gray. And they felt like that controlled what was going on in the painting better. And that reminds me, I'll get back to the history lesson in a second, but one of the things that the pre-Raphaelites talked about when it came to their technique was the fact that when they were painting with full-bodied paint into this white that they put down first and wiped off, was that it forced them to be very purposeful about the marks they were making, the strokes they were making, because the white would get picked up if they repeated strokes or dragged too long or whatever. And that's something that you'll find here too. The paint that you put on the gray, it will pick up a little gray, but it will pick up less if you make singular strokes. And you can see what I'm doing now in the painting is I got all the local color in, and now I'm blocking half the painting with my shoulder, but I'm going in and I'm just adding more and more paint and just continuing to develop what I already had. And you know, this whole painting, I mean, this video is 14 minutes long or so, but this whole painting, I got the whole thing done in like less than 2 hours. And I know in the painting it looks like I'm rushing, but I really wasn't rushing. I was just going at my normal pace, and I'm a slow painter. I'm not someone who's known for working quickly. But this technique, it really gets the ball rolling. So we know that the pre-Raphaelites used a version of this. A couple of the books that I have that reference this technique, they swear up and down that Titian was somebody who used variations on this. And that's the only big name that I have for you. But what I wanted to mention is that the person that brought this technique to my attention and made me take it seriously was Nicholas Uribe, and his YouTube channel is probably the best demonstration YouTube channel. His discussions are always really good, but his painting technique and his ability to solve problems on the fly in these demo videos that he puts up every day, which is a ridiculous pace, they're phenomenal. So his YouTube channel is called Our Painted Lives, and it's really worth looking at. If you're a student of mine, I have given you links to his YouTube channel, so you know about it. But anyone else who's interested, he's phenomenal, and he introduced this technique to me back in the early 2000s, during the heyday of the internet, the painting forum, where the painting forums now are all just sort of massage parlors. Back in the early 2000s, the painting forums were just serious business. You posted something, one of your paintings on one of those forums, and you just had to, like, buckle up, because you were going to get like a serious feedback, sometimes a little more serious than you wanted. But anyway, I sort of ran into him in that environment, and he talked about learning the Blob when he was in art school as a way to be more efficient about the painting process when you're in a classroom. And so I started using it for the same reason, and it's a really great technique. So a shout out to Nicholas for that. It's a definitely something that has informed my ability to solve problems quickly, even if that's not something I consider myself super good at. Painting for me is more of I like to think of it as a chess match that involves layers. Just like in a chess game, you have an opening and you have a middle game and you have an end game. I like to think of my paintings in the same way. But it's fun sometimes to be able to work the technique up all at once and get a level of finish. So in this painting, while I'm working on the finishing touches here, one of the things I want to emphasize is that when I blocked in my big local colors, I was trying to change the colors often as I could so that I would have as little work to do later in the fine-tuning stage. But I was trying to be very purposeful about my marks and not drag or lick my strokes. And I was setting myself up for this. And I know that while I'm doing the fine-tuning, you guys can see the brushes I'm using. They're small. There are times when I come in with a bigger brush, but I am using kind of small brushes. But what I'm doing is I'm being very purposeful about how much paint is on my brush. It's hard to see, but I'm loading my brush very, very heavily. And as I paint into the paint that's already there, I have to have more paint on my brush. The brush that I'm holding there is a liner, so it's a really tiny brush, but the hairs are long. And a liner brush can hold, for a small brush like that, a ridiculous amount of paint. And that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to, at some point, maybe put on Instagram close-up shots of some of the other parts of the painting, especially the part that's all carbonized and black at the top. It got pretty heavy and thick and loose in there, and there was some pretty heavy handling. So I want to be able to show people that. The video is never going to capture that.